What is going on, you guys? My name is Rayge, and we are back today with an exciting video in regards to my Dark Dimension 6 progress, but more importantly, we're going to be talking about now the city section and the 5 characters that I am planning to bring and the logic behind that. So, if you guys have been following along, I just wrapped up Cosmic, and yeah, super excited to get started here. This is a very amazing game mode. It's the end game of the end game in terms of bringing all these characters to Gear Tier 18. We're entering city section, and there's only a few more sections left, so it's really exciting just to get to that finish line here. I love keeping you guys up to date, but as well showcasing for you my overall strategy, with me being free to play as well. Just being able to showcase my resource strategy and allocation as I progress further into my account. So having said that, I think it really makes sense to actually showcase for you guys here all of the viable characters in my honest opinion, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, but I do think that this is pretty conclusive of some of the best options that are available for city. Now, from what I've seen and what I've heard is that the city section is actually not as bad as the cosmic and global sections. However, the selection of characters is definitely not as great as variety as what we've seen, with Apocalypse being available in Global, and then we have Val, Kang, the Eternals all being available in Cosmic. So, honestly, at the end of the day, we just have to make the best of what we got. But I think first and foremost, before we even start talking about any of these characters and the 5 I'm choosing, the biggest thing here is understanding your resource constraint. There's certain choices that I've made along the way in both Global and Cosmic that have kind of reverberated now to the impact overall in city, and we also need to think about how this is going to impact us heading into the legendary sections as well. So we'll start top down. The way I organize this information is based on the number of characters kind of available in each trait section, but really understand, before you even start selecting the characters, understand your resources, understand what you have and what you don't, and that's ultimately going to be allowing you to give you those options that are available. You might want the best team for city section, but it may not be possible given your resources, and whether you want to enter earlier or wait months to get to that resource, that is going to be dependent upon how you actually manage that progression and the characters that have been brought up along the way. First and foremost, big time Spider-Man. You know what? He can do some really good damage. I really like the fact that he has good defense downs. He's in the meta right now for war defense, so you will be getting value out of him such as that. But what I really like about big time is that he's probably the best tech option, to be honest, if you guys have tech gear at this point in the city section. I would say tech gear and skill is definitely 2 areas that we have a little bit more wiggle room in, but love the fact that he's a fellow Spider-Man. He's in the meta for war, so you won't be losing value there, but outside of that you won't be getting much. It's not like he has ability crowd controlling and so forth, right? So he's just raw damage, but I do like the fact that he can flip positives with his ultimate. Mutants, Firestar and Miss Marvel Hardlight. I think these 2 are pretty much lock options if you have mutant gear. They're really good. I mean, it makes sense. Hardlight is a in the Secret Defenders meta right now in terms of being part of the arena, but as well they're just usable in all game modes. Firestar is part of New Warrior, so you'll be getting value out of Crucible, but both of them do different roles, right? Hardlight's more of a tanky support role, whereas Firestar is going to be dealing additional damage and bleeds. She's cheap, efficient damage, so if you guys want to bring characters like that, but remember, mutant gear is what you need, and we still need Omega Red in the legendary section, in my honest opinion, so something you might want to be mindful about. But good news with both these characters is that they're both relatively, I think Firestar more so, cheap or good value for what you're building, so as long as you have the resources, and they can add a lot to your roster and kind of fill in that support role. We have Ronin, Shang-Chi, and Kingpin here in the skill section, right? And to be honest, I put Ronin on here just because of the fact that he's part of New Avengers, but his cooldowns are quite high. They have been revamped and revised quite a bit, so you'll be definitely getting value outside of Dark Dimension, but I don't know if I would recommend him just because his skill set isn't really meant for Dark Dimension. So that's the one thing I will place here with a disclaimer. But having said that, I think Shang-Chi and as well as Kingpin, they're both really, really good options. They both support the team in different ways, right? You know, Kingpin has more of that supportive defensive role, especially with the minions being able to soak up damage, good cooldowns, being able to provide barrier. Shang-Chi is the opposite, doing more damage, reducing turn meter, providing a small little cleanse to the team, but it has really low cooldowns, and he's a really good all-around DPS plus pseudo support role, which I really like. If you have the resources for him, I think he's a great option, to be honest. I've historically always brought in Shang-Chi in my past Dark Dimensions. So I think great value. The only thing now is that we need to be mindful of the skill gear, especially if you're planning to bring in Black Cat for the legendary section. It's definitely going to play a factor. Now, we are entering more of the variety of characters available in both Bio and Mystic gear. Bio is the most elusive one and interesting because I think there's a lot of good options here. It really just depends on what you want to do with your Bio gear, right? I mean, Spider-Man 2099 and Spider-Woman I think are really, really good options because they're both really cheap, first of all. But I mean, depending on what you want outside Dark Dimension, I think is the big role. Thankfully, with 2099, he does actually have a lot of synergy with Spider-Weaver, and the bleeds do work really well actually with Robbie Reyes if you bring him in as Mystic. So I think he's kind of a lock, to be honest. But I'll showcase for you guys though what we decide on, but I think that there's just really good options here. I really like the fact that 2099 also has crowd controlling, same as Spider-Woman. Then we get into more as a defensive-minded characters that are a little bit more costly, but again, if you have Bio Gear, it can be a completely different story for your account, right? I mean, Miss Marvel, Squirrel Girl, both having synergies, being part of Young Avengers. It's a darn shame. There's not really much value that you're going to get outside of Dark Dimension because they're completely falling out of the meta. They're just one of those like average teams that are decent all across the board, but they're not really top of anything. But I think Squirrel Girl's healing is probably the most prominent out of this entire group. If you bring her in, she has offense down, healing. She can get turn meter whenever her HP does go below that threshold level and support other Young Avengers if they're in the mix here. So I think that's really cool. And then last but not least, guys, Mystic section is probably the hardest deciders here. But I mean, there's been some changes in the game, especially with the Secret Defenders, that make this a little bit easier. So first and foremost, Cloak and Dagger are without a doubt the best in slot. Like if you bring them in, it's gonna be you're gonna be coasting through the nodes from what we've seen. I mean, and I'm talking about one-shotting or two-shotting each of the nodes, right? But the thing is that Mystic gear is not a luxury. If you brought in Mystic characters previously for Global or Cosmic, this is likely going to play a factor. Thankfully, I don't think a lot of folks will bring in Adam Warlock for the Legendary section, so you probably won't need to worry about that. But this is kind of why it's important to manage all your resources throughout the entire journey of Dark Dimension 6, right? So I think Spider-Man Noir, he's not really talked about a lot because, to be honest, like he's not actually that great. But I mean, he's cheap. He has synergy with 2099, and he can, if you build him up for Dark Dimension 6, he's gonna have some value in Crucible with Spider-Weaver. So I definitely think there's some potential there, but he's just probably gonna fall quite a bit, and he's cheap, which could get you into Mystic gear, right? But I think Robbie Reyes is the instant lock here. It's kind of like how we. Robbie Reyes is the Vow and Apocalypse equivalent of their respective sections in Dark Dimension 6. You just need to have him in. There's just a couple reasons, right? His kit is so good. Great self-sustain. His bleeds allow him to earn and gain turn meter. And on top of that, he's part of the meta for the arena. So, I mean, he's really checking off literally all the boxes. He's relevant. He's usable in all game modes. It really does make sense to build him up above anybody else. Now, if you can lock in Robbie, then we can start talking about the other options here, right? Which is, we have Gwenpool being available, Mr. Negative, Noir, Cloak and Dagger. I mean, Mystic is going to be kind of the harder one to squeeze out, but some of these characters are really good, especially if you're able to bring in a character like Mr. Negative or Cloak and Dagger, Gwenpool. Their support capabilities, their damage, their debuffs, it's all going to help the team, I think. And that's why Mystic gear is kind of the one I had a little bit more focus on, especially when we were working on my Cosmic nodes. I brought in Ravager Stitcher, so just so I didn't have to use any Mystic gear and save that for the City node. So There you guys have it. That's a pretty high level overview of the characters. Now let's dive into the 5 that I am planning to use. Here we go. So I mean, I kind of already alluded to before, but the fact that Robbie is in the meta, he's such a good character. He's decent. He's decently cheap for bringing in. He has crowd controlling. He has a devastating ultimate ability, and he gets a turn meter whenever anyone on the team is inflicting bleed on the opposing team. I mean, it really does make sense to bring in Robbie. I think he's an actual no-brainer. If you're going to use Mystic Gear, make sure you lock in Robbie before anybody else, because he is that good. He was made for Dark Dimension 6. Next up, yeah, Spider-Man big time. I alluded to this before, but I think he's an instant lock because of the fact that he's tech, he's cheap. He's got some good damage, good survivability for himself, granting evasion, and also being able to help the team by stripping and flipping away the positive buffs that exist on him. So just a really good value option. That's something we haven't seen in the past in Dark Dimensions, is having actually a good tech option in the city, something we can put our resources to, because the other meaningful character in Dark Dimension with tech gear is Kang, and we don't really use tech much. So I mean, I love that aspect. Take advantage of the resources that we do have, right? Now, Shang-Chi, I know I've seen players say he's hit or miss, but to be honest, like, I've always used him in Dark Dimension, so I had no issues bringing him up. I was pretty happy, to be honest, because I've seen what he can do in Dark Dimension 5. Yes, his heal can definitely be a little better for his team, but the fact that he also grants himself turn meter, he has a small little cleanse for himself and 1 negative for allies. It's not the best, but it does help out. Everything you need for assistance is huge here, right? And that's why I love Shang-Chi. And when you stack his ultimate ability with enemy buffs that are stacked on top of each other, his damage scales, which is absolutely huge, and reducing your turn meter is beautiful. Buys us time. A pseudo crowd controlling attack where we can basically get additional turn meter as opposed to the enemy, which is big for us, especially in a turn-based game. Now things start getting interesting here. So the reason I saved up all the Mystic Gear, and the reason I was so conservative through my global and cosmic sections, because out of those 2 sections, I only brought in 1 Mystic character, being Val, is because I wanted to really strongly bring in another Mystic character. I've used Cloak before in Dark Dimension 5, even without Dagger, and it is like night and day. I mean, my goodness, like his debuffs, the fact that he can actually strip away all positives, even including Tom with his special, applying offense down, defense down. He's gonna have a lot of synergy, especially with the team, but as well buying my entire team a round of protection, because of the fact that if he can cast and land blinds, it's basically like crowd controlling all the enemies for 1 full turn, which could be the difference maker, because as you've seen with my team right now, we don't have a lot of heals and we're not getting much value from any kind of supporting role, but we have a lot of debuffs that we can inflict on our enemies. Last but not least, I think Spider-Man 2099 is almost a pseudo lock, because if you're bringing in Robbie Reyes, it absolutely makes sense. He's got crowd controlling. He's got the second ability block next to Robbie, so that way they can control enemies. His basic attack is kind of the driver behind it, though. He can attack enemies that are adjacent to each other and apply the bleed. This is going to synergize extremely well with Robbie Reyes, gaining the turn meter, so he's going to be a big difference maker there. Also, his devastating ultimate ability costs quite a bit of energy, but if the primary target has death proof, he's applying death proof to himself and all allies, so you can target that just right. It's huge. As well as his very devastating clearing positive effects, applying slow defense down. I mean, he's doing a little bit of everything on AoE. I've definitely heard that he's historically been very squishy for Dark Dimension, so that's kind of why I pushed him to 7 red. But as well, let's not forget, you can now farm his red stars actually in the Incursion campaign, so make sure you guys take advantage of that. And as well, outside of Dark Dimension, all these characters are going to be providing some sort of value into my account, whether it's War, whether it's Crucible. But yeah, that's the game plan, guys. Those are my 5. Let me know what you guys think that I'm planning on bringing up. I think they're going to synergize extremely well. I'll obviously keep you guys up to date as I progress further. Really appreciate you guys following on. Thank you as always, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.